Hey guys, tonight we slip beneath the ice. Not the kind that cracks prettily in your glass, but the kind that crushes steel if you get too close. You're about to drift through the dim corridors of an Arctic submarine, a floating metal whale gliding under frozen seas where sunlight doesn't bother to visit. The hum you hear, that's the steady heartbeat of engines. The air tastes like metal and recycled breath. Your world is pipes, valves, and bunks, no wider than a coffin. You'll learn quickly that warmth in here isn't just a comfort, it's survival. And honestly, you probably wouldn't last a night without the tricks we're about to explore. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are now. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck your head under a low bulkhead and enter. A passageway barely shouldered. The submarine creaks softly, like a living thing sighing in its sleep. You're hundreds of feet under Arctic ice and outside the hull. The temperature sits far below freezing cold enough to turn seawater into jagged glass. Inside, it's not exactly cozy, but it's life. The air carries that faint mix of oil, ozone, and human closeness. You feel warmth seeping from the machinery, yet the still walls still whisper chill through your fingertips. The first thing that surprises you. No one panics about the cold. Sailors move in short sleeves, sometimes, laughing, juggling mugs of coffee. The submarine's power systems, especially the engines and electrical converters, throw off heat constantly. Waste heat is a blessing in this world, and naval engineers know how to capture every bit of it. The temperature is regulated carefully, because too warm means condensation dripping down walls. Too cold, and you risk frost on your pillow. Historians still argue whether early Arctic subs had better luck with electric heating coils or radiator piping systems, since reports from the 1940s conflict. Some crews swore by the simplicity of oil-fueled heaters. Others claimed they froze until they learned to reroute engine heat. Either way, survival wasn't about luxury. It was about balance, enough warmth to keep instruments functioning, but not enough to advertise your position to enemy sonar with thermal plumes. You step past the mess table, which doubles as a navigation plotting area during emergencies. The metal benches are cold to touch, but underneath, pipes rumbled faintly, part of the heating loop that threads the sub like hidden arteries. You imagine trying to sleep in this space. You'd hear the gentle clatter of spoons in the galley, the distant hiss of oxygen regulators. Somewhere, a sailor snores softly. There's humor, even down here. Someone taped a paper snowman on a bulkhead, its smile drawn with grease pencil. It's the kind of gallows humor submariners use to remind themselves that they're still human. You pass a sign scrawled near the control room. No penguins beyond this point. You chuckle. But it's true, you haven't seen daylight in weeks. Your guide, an engineer with oil-stained hands, explains how every surface is double-purposed. The deck plates, insulated from below to prevent heat loss to the hull. The pipes, wrapped in asbestos-laden blankets back then, before anyone worried about the consequences. Even your breath plays a role in the microclimate, adding moisture that condenses on metal ceilings. You're sleeping inside a living laboratory of thermodynamics. You learn that submarines under ice can't surface easily. If a malfunction kills the heating, you're stuck improvising. There are stories, half legend, half truth, of crews sleeping in shifts beside running machinery for warmth. One World War II British patrol reportedly gathered in the engine compartment, dozing between fuel pumps. Quirky detail. Some sailors swore by stuffing their socks with tea leaves to keep their feet from freezing. The tannins supposedly dried the skin, a folk remedy that probably worked no better than wishful thinking. But in the Arctic, superstition often became standard procedure. Even so, nothing prepares you for how small the world feels. When the sub moves through thicker ice, the hull groans. It's not the gentle kind of sound. is a long, metallic complaint that reverberates in your chest. You try to convince yourself it's normal. After a while, the noises blend with your pulse. You start measuring time by the rhythm of pumps rather than clocks. The temperature remains surprisingly steady around 20 degrees Celsius in living areas, though it feels cooler because of humidity. The air tastes damp, sometimes salty. You brush against a cold bulkhead and recoil the steel's heat fast. You understand now why sailors hang towels or blankets over certain panels. Primitive but effective barrier. A petty officer passes by, holding what looks like a thick notebook. It's actually the comfort log where crew record cabin conditions, air temperature, dew point, even how stuffy it feels. Command uses this to adjust airflow or tweak heating valves. It's a small ritual that gives everyone the illusion of control in a place where control is always temporary. Later, when the lights dim for the night cycle, though night is a concept more than reality, you sense how the cold creeps back. The engines quiet, and without their radiant warmth, the hull breathes frost. You pull the blanket closer, coarse navy wool with a faint smell of detergent and oil. Around you, the submarine sighs again, settling into its under-ice rhythm. You can almost feel the Arctic pressing down miles of frozen water above. In silence, so vast, it feels alive. Your bunkmate snores softly, the kind of muffled snore that merges with the hum of fans. Someone shifts, mutters in their sleep. For a moment, you imagine you're inside the belly of a sleeping beast, dreaming of warmth. Then there's that creeping thought, what if the heat failed? The crew trains for it, of course. Emergency blankets, heating elements, procedures. But everyone knows that under ice rescue isn't coming fast. So they keep the systems checked obsessively. The engineer's mantra echoes in your head. Warmth equals life. Everything else is just detail. As you drift toward sleep, you notice the condensation droplets forming above you, trembling in the dim, red emergency light. They hang there, quivering like tiny worlds of their own, until one finally falls, cold against your cheek. You flinch and laugh quietly. It's the submarine's version of a bedtime kiss outside. The Arctic night stretches on forever, silent and merciless. Inside, surrounded by machinery, metal, and men half dreaming, you realize something profound. Warmth here isn't just temperature, it's trust, teamwork, and 1,000 tiny acts of care that keep the cold where it belongs outside. You wake to a muffled clang, someone shutting a hatch 2 compartments away. The sound travels through the hull like a heartbeat, familiar and oddly comforting. You blink against the dim red glow that substitutes for dawn in this undersea world. There's no sunrise here, only the slow rhythm of the ship's artificial lighting, cycling from red to white and back again to trick your body into remembering time. You stretch, but there's barely room for that. Your shoulder hits the bunk frame above you with a dull thunk. Congratulations, you've just rediscovered the geometry of submarine sleep. You're in what sailors call the berthing area, though that makes it sound grander than it is. In truth, it's a metal cave, the width of a hallway. It's filled with stacked bunks 3 high, sometimes 4 if space runs tight. Each is roughly the size of a coffin, about 2 feet wide and 6 feet long, with a thin mattress and a curtain for privacy. That's right, your entire sleeping world is a personal rectangle of air. It's barely big enough to roll over in. You try to imagine stretching out luxuriously like you do at home. Not happening. Here, movement is more like origami. You fold yourself into sleep position and hope no one needs to climb past. The air smells faintly of detergent, human breath, and machine oil, a mix so constant it becomes invisible to your senses. Someone nearby snores in short bursts. Another shifts, the curtain rustling softly. The odd thing is, the space works. It's tight, yes, but efficient, every cubic inch calculated. The bunks are set perpendicular to the hull, so your head is never more than an arm's length from the cold steel. Overhead pipes hum with life. The faint vibration through the frame feels like a mechanical lullaby. You start to understand why sailors describe their bunks as personal sanctuaries. They might be small, but in a world of duty, noise, and watch rotations, this is your kingdom. Back in early submarine days, think World War I, the crew didn't have these metal bunks. They slept in hammocks slung between pipes, or even across torpedo racks. When the sea got rough, the hammocks swayed in rhythm with the boat, a motion both soothing and sickening, depending on your stomach's loyalty. Hammocks had one big advantage though. They stayed warmer. Air circulated around them, keeping condensation from soaking through. By World War II, submarines got more sophisticated bunks with thin mattresses over metal frames. Each berth often doubled as storage space. The mattress would lift, revealing a compartment below, packed with spare parts, rations, or personal items. In U.S. subs, the bottom bunks often rested directly over torpedoes. You'd fall asleep above a weapon longer than a limousine, hoping the safety pins did their job. One sailor once joked, "If it blows, I'll never wake up cold." Kahlo's humor again. But it helped. Historians still argue whether the Germans or the Americans perfected hot bunking first. The term doesn't mean what it sounds like. It refers to multiple sailors sharing the same bunk in shifts. When one crew member gets up for duty, another immediately slides in, the sheets still warm. Efficient, yes, but also intimate in ways few people discuss. You get used to the faint scent of someone else's soap or sweat clinging to the pillow. Personal space becomes a philosophical concept. Quirky detail. Some sailors decorated their bunks like dorm rooms. A photo taped to the ceiling, a tiny battery light, maybe a packet of instant coffee stashed by the pillow. One British submariner in 1943 reportedly hung a miniature stuffed penguin above his bunk for company, survived 3 patrols, and became a mascot. In an environment where even a square inch of decoration breaks the monotony, such tokens mean everything. You run your hand along the bulkhead near your pillow. It's cold, but not icy. Engineers line these walls with insulation panels, sometimes cork in early designs, later fiberglass. The challenge wasn't just warmth, it was sound. The metal amplifies every vibration, every whisper. That's why most bunks come with those thin curtains. They're less about privacy and more about illusion, creating a soft barrier against light and noise. When you settle into your bunk, you do so like a ritual. You tuck your parka at your feet if it's extra cold. Put your socks into the corner so they don't float off if the submarine tilts. Then you slide the curtain shut, and for a few hours, this rectangle becomes your world. You can almost forget that only inches away. Other lives hum in parallel. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, barely 10 inches above your face. The paint's chipped in places, showing steel beneath. You trace the patterns idly, trying to remember what day it is. Days lose meaning in here. You live by watches 6 hours on duty, 12 off. But even off watch, you might be called to help. Sleep isn't rest as much as it's borrowed time. Still, you learn tricks. Veterans claim you can fall asleep in under 30 seconds if you focus on the hum of the engines. The vibration helps, like the world's loudest white noise machine. Others swear by counting each ping of the sonar pulse, a rhythm that feels oddly hypnotic. And if all else fails, you think about warmth, imagining the sun. Or maybe just a hot mug of cocoa waiting in the galley. Your body adjusts in strange ways. The cold of the hole keeps your skin alert, but the narrow space traps body heat efficiently. After 10 minutes, it's a microclimateral breath warms the air. The blanket seals it in. You begin to sweat slightly, and condensation forms on the wall. A drip, drip, drip like the world's slowest metrome. One night, the boat tilts suddenly during a maneuver. You roll sideways, thump against the curtain, and mutter something impolite. Someone below laughs. There's no privacy or embarrassment here, but the laughter helps human sound, cutting through the mechanical rhythm. As you settle back, you think of the submariners of the Cold War who spent months beneath the ice, sleeping beside nuclear reactors instead of diesel engines. Their bunks looked similar, but the heat came steady, drawn from atomic fire instead of combustion. One American crewman once said the warmth was so constant it made you forget you were under ice until a valve jammed and you saw frost creep up your cup. You stretch your toes again, testing the edges of your small kingdom. The chill returns briefly, then fades as your body heat settles. The curtain flutters with the soft exhale of recycled air. You listen to the muffled breathing all around, the occasional cough or snore, and realize this is community at its most compact. Every square foot of this submarine is measured against survival, and every sailor adapts to that reality. Sleep isn't about comfort. It's about surrendering control without losing awareness. You learn to dream within steel boundaries, to rest while the Arctic presses its frozen weight above you. And when you finally drift off, you don't think about the cold anymore. You think about warmth, the kind that comes from shared spaces, from the breath of the person in the next bunk, from the heartbeat of a vessel keeping dozens alive in the dark. The hum deepens. The hull sighs again. The submarine keeps gliding through the under-ice night. And you, cocooned in your tiny rectangle, surrender to the rhythm. You wake again, this time to the low, rhythmic thrum of circulating pumps. The sound is everywhere, vibrating faintly through the mattress frame. It's not unpleasant. It's the heartbeat of warmth itself. Deep in the submarine's guts, hot water is running through insulated pipes, carrying the life that keeps you from freezing solid under 1,000,000 tons of Arctic ice. You shuffle down the narrow passage, its feet brushing against cold deck plates. The air feels warmer here than in the sleeping quarters, a clue that you've wandered closer to the mechanical heart. The submarine's thermal design isn't about comfort. It's a feat of engineering minimalism, a dance of heat recovery, insulation, and controlled waste. Everything that burns, spins, or charges creates heat, and that heat must be either used or hidden. It starts with insulation. Early submarines learned this lesson the hard way. Without proper thermal barriers, internal heat escaped through the hull into the freezing water, causing two problems. First, it cooled the interior dangerously fast. Second, it made the sub visible to sonar-equipped enemies that could detect temperature differentials. So, engineers lined compartments with insulation panels, first cork, later fiberglass, eventually advanced foams and ceramic coatings. You can almost hear them whispering the mantra, keep the heat in, keep the enemy out. You run a hand over a panel and feel its faint warmth. Behind it, a labyrinth of pipes channels hot water from the engines and electrical converters. These systems, especially on DC electric subs, waste more energy as heat than as propulsion. Rather than vent it, engineers designed a system to capture that excess warmth and circulate it through the living quarters. It's called heat scavenging, and it's the reason you're not an ice sculpture right now. Historians still argue whether the Soviets or the Americans perfected closed-loop heat recovery first during the early Cold War. Each side claimed innovation, but documents suggest both were experimenting independently, driven by necessity more than competition. Either way, engineering kept hundreds of sailors alive in places where even a few degrees drop meant frostbitten fingers, or, worse, malfunctioning instruments. You duck into the control room, where a cluster of gauges and valves hum quietly. The chief engineer stands nearby, coffee in hand, monitoring temperature differentials like a hawk. He nods at the glowing dials. "This," he says, "is our fireplace." You laugh softly, but he's right. A fireplace without flame, without wood, without the comforting crackle, just pure thermodynamics. In motion, the submarine's heating system is a balance between efficiency and safety. Too much heat and condensation becomes a nightmare, dripping from ceilings, shorting circuits, making every surface slick. Too little, and you risk frost forming on hatches, making them difficult or impossible to open. To manage that balance, engineers run a network of thermostatic valves that automatically reroute heat as needed. In modern boats, sensors do this electronically. In older ones, it was done manually, with sailors literally adjusting knobs every few hours. Then there's the air itself. The temperature might be comfortable, but air circulation is another story. You can feel it's a steady whisper of fans pulling air through filters, heaters, and scrubbers before sending it back through narrow ducts. It's always the same air, recycled endlessly. Some sailors claim they can tell when the air has been through too many times by tastes like metal and breath mixed together. They aren't wrong. A quirky fact: during long Arctic patrols, some submarines used what they called heat mushrooms, portable, mushroom-shaped, radiant heaters placed in strategic corners. They looked like tiny lamps, but instead of light, they radiated warmth. Crews huddled near them during maintenance shifts, trading jokes and chocolate bars while pretending it was a campfire. One sailor wrote in his journal that it was the closest thing to a summer evening you could have at -40. You step closer to a vent and hold your palm up. Warm air flows gently, carrying the faint scent of oil and something metallic. It's surprisingly comforting. The heat isn't constant, though it pulses slightly as systems regulate pressure. You can feel it fluctuate like a slow breath in the Arctic. The greatest enemy isn't cold heat's moisture. Warm air holds water vapor, and when it meets the sub's icy skin, it condenses instantly. Left unchecked, condensation becomes frost, which builds on walls, pipes, even clothing. So part of the thermal design includes dehumidifiers, small worry boxes hidden behind panels. They suck moisture from the air, condense it, and send the water to waste tanks. It's the quietest hero of the submarine, the difference between cozy and damp misery. One of the engineers tells you a story half technical, half myth. During a 1950s Arctic mission, a heater malfunctioned and the temperature dropped overnight. The crew woke to find frost blooming on the inside of their bunks, delicate and crystalline. Rather than panic, they took turns wiping it off, joking that they'd brought the North Pole inside. By morning, repairs restored warmth. Historians still debate whether the event really happened or was exaggerated as a morale story, but either way, it's part of submarine lore now. As you move deeper into the boat, you notice that not all compartments are equally warm. Machinery spaces glow with heat. The torpedo room, by contrast, feels brisk. That's intentional. Sensitive electronics and weaponry prefer cooler air, so engineers regulate temperature compartment by compartment. You could walk from a toasty galley to a refrigerator-cold torpedo bay in 30 seconds flat. You learn to dress and layers a shirt under a sweater, under a jacket ready to peel or add at any moment. Your guide points out another feature: double hatches between major compartments. They act as thermal buffers, keeping warmth contained. You start noticing them everywhere. It's a gateway between climates. You step through one and feel an instant chill, the way you might crossing from a sunlit kitchen into a walk-in freezer. The contrast makes you grateful for every watt of heat the ship generates. Sometimes, though, the heat hides a danger. In confined metal spaces, temperature changes can cause expansion and contraction, leading to stress on welds and joints. The hull, like a living creature, flexes and relaxes. Engineers constantly monitor for signs of fatigue creaks, ticks, minute temperature differentials that could hint at weakness. You hear those sounds now, a faint plink-plink like distant raindrops. They're harmless, mostly, but the first time you hear them in the dark. Your imagination doesn't think so. You pause near a bulkhead, lean against the warm metal, and feel a slow realization. This entire ship is a balance between opposites: warmth versus cold, pressure versus vacuum, noise versus silence, and sleep always, sleep versus vigilance. A subtle vibration runs through the floor. The engines adjust output, and a wave of warmer air rolls down the corridor. Someone mutters, central's bleeding off more heat. and goes back to his station. You smile. The language of warmth here is technical, precise, okay, and deeply human. By the time you return to your bunk, the space feels slightly warmer. Your blanket traps the residual heat, and the mattress hums faintly from the deck below. You stretch out, sigh, and think about how all this piping valves, humming machineries, the unseen guardian that lets you drift to sleep while an ocean of frozen darkness presses around you. You don't need a fireplace or even a sun. You've got the warmth of a machine that refuses to die, and somehow that feels almost romantic. You wake to the quiet hiss of air circulation, the kind that blends into background thought. The lights are dimmed to a soft amber now night mode, though the sea outside doesn't care what time it is. You're cocooned in your bunk, wrapped in the submarine's delicate balance of warmth and chill. Tonight, though, we're zooming in not on metal or machinery, but on the most personal layer of defense between you and the Arctic, what you wear and what you sleep in. You stretch and feel the scratchy texture of the navy blanket, heavy but reassuring. The fabric's rough enough to exfoliate, but it traps heat like a loyal dog curling up against you. Sailors didn't complain much about softness down here. Warmth was worth any inch. You pulled the edge of it to your chin, listening to the faint murmur of the engines beyond the bulkhead. Somewhere in that hum is a reminder. This ship keeps you alive. Cool. So does every thread on your body. Submariners didn't have the luxury of bulky parkas or down sleeping bags. Space was gold, and everything had to serve multiple purposes. So clothing became strategy. Layers upon layers, cotton undershirts, wool jumpers, thick socks that reached your calves. The trick wasn't just staying warm. It was managing moisture. Sweat in the Arctic is a silent assassin. You work, you sweat, and when you stop, that dampness turns to ice faster than you can say frostbite. So you learn to dry your underlayers near vents, rotating them like sacred relics. During World War II, British submariners favored wool from Shetland sheeptents, lanolin rich, and naturally water resistant. It smelled like a farm when wet, but it worked. German U-boat crews, by contrast, swore by wool blend, long johns, and lined leather slippers. They even wore knit caps to bed, a habit that spread across navies because heat lost through the head was a serious issue. A sailor once joked, "Better to sleep ugly than sleep frozen." Fair point. You reach into the small locker by your bunk, barely big enough for a week's laundry. Inside, neatly folded, are 3 uniforms. One for watch duty, one for mess duty, one for sleep. Each has its place in the thermal hierarchy. Your sleep uniform is the warmest. Thick wool trousers and a pullover that smells faintly of detergent and salt. When you slip it on, you feel the transformation. It's like shedding armor for comfort. Quirky fact: American submariners during the Cold War developed an unofficial garment called the Arctic vest. It was an issue. It was scavenged. Sailors stitched together scraps of insulation from packaging and lined them with fabric from old flight jackets. It looked ridiculous, but worked beautifully. Commanders pretended not to see it, probably because they wore versions of it themselves. As you lie back, you notice the fabric underneath the mattress cover. It's vinyl coated, designed to repel moisture, easy to wipe down. The mattress itself is foam, a step up from the hay-stuffed pads used in early submarines. In the 1940s, sailors often slept directly on thin ticking filled with kapok fiber, the same stuff used in life jackets. Soft at first, but over time it compacted into something closer to plywood. When a new recruit complained, old-timers told him, "Don't worry, get softer after your bones give up." Historians still argue whether submariners slept warmer in wartime diesel boats or peacetime nuclear ones. Diesel subs were noisy, full of engine heat, but prone to sudden chills when engines shut down. Nuclear subs, on the other hand, had constant warmth but also more regulated airflow, which meant drier, thinner air that sapped moisture from your skin. Either way, comfort was relative. Warmth was survival. Softness was luxury. You tug your blanket higher, feeling the static cling of wool against your hair. The blanket's weave is dense enough to block drafts, and its edges are bound with reinforced stitching to survive years of service. A tag near the corner reads something mundane like property of HM Submarine service. But you can imagine the stories it's absorbed: naps between alarms, nights under Arctic pressure, the weight of men who dreamed of sun. There's a ritual here before sleep: layering. You pull on thick socks first, then tug your sweater over your head, tucking it snugly at the waist. The idea is to seal in warmth without creating air gaps. One sailor calls it dressing like an onion because you'll cry if you get it wrong. The joke lands better when you're not half frozen. You glance at your bunkmate's corner. He's tucked into his own cocoon, a hat pulled low, blanket tight to the chin. Some sailors sleep with gloves on, fingers curled under their chins to keep blood flowing. You'd think it looks uncomfortable, but you learn that discomfort is relative when your breath fogs the air. A small heater hums near the far bulkhead, giving off a steady warmth. Someone's hung socks nearby to dry. They sway gently in the air current like prayer flags, sending up faint waves of woolly scent. That smells wet, detergent, and metal becomes home. You wouldn't trade it for lavender-scented linen if it meant losing the heat that keeps your toes attached. Every item on a submarine has to earn its keep, and bedding is no exception. Blankets double as insulation, padding for fragile gear, even makeshift bandages in emergencies. There's a story, half true, half legend, of a crewman on an Arctic patrol who tore his blanket into strips to patch a leaking pipe. The repair held just long enough for the sub to resurface. When asked later, he said, "It was either the pipe or my toes. I picked the pipe." Historians still debate whether that happened, but the tale circulates in every submarine mess like gospel. You notice condensation collecting again on the wall beside your bunk. Tiny droplets cling to the metal, refracting the dim light into tiny stars. You wipe it with the corner of your blanket, smearing the cold sheen away. That simple motion, absent-minded, half asleep, is the difference between staying dry and waking up in a puddle. Every sailor becomes an expert in microclimate management. And here's a fun, if slightly odd, tidbit. During particularly long patrols, submariners sometimes used hot water bottles improvised from sealed ration tins. They'd fill them with heated water from the galley and tuck them under blankets for an extra hour of comfort. Ingenious, a little dangerous, but desperate times breed innovation. You shift again, feeling the warmth slowly balance. The combination of wool, body heat, and recycled air creates a pocket of gentle, damp warmth. Your breath fogs faintly, but you don't care. You've found equilibrium. The Arctic can rage outside, ice grinding and cracking overhead. And yet, inside this thin metal tube, you've built a human microclimate. It's fragile. Yes, but it's yours. As you drift, you think of all those layers, not just clothing and blankets, but layers of ingenuity, adaptation, and stubbornness. Every stitch, every trick, every extra sock tells a story of people who refuse to let the cold win. You pull your blanket tighter and smile faintly, whispering to the dark, "Not tonight, Arctic." The hum answers like a lullaby. The next thing you notice is the air. It's always there, quiet, recycled, slightly metallic, but once you tune in, you can feel it brushing across your face like a ghost that never leaves. On land, you take air for granted. Down here, it's a daily negotiation between life, moisture, and machinery. You learn quickly that comfort in a submarine isn't just about heat, it's about humidity. You swing out of your bunk and plant your feet on the deck, which feels cool but not freezing. The faint hiss you hear isn't steam, it's the ventilation system, the lung of this steel whale. Every minute, air circulates through scrubbers, heaters, and filters, then winds its way through narrow ducts back into the living spaces. It's a full cycle of breath, repeated endlessly. You breathe in what others exhaled yesterday, though thankfully it smells mostly of detergent and coffee. Submariners used to joke that the air had been around the world and back through Jones's socks. They weren't wrong, with no way to open a window. The crew relies entirely on the ship's scrubber's chemical systems that remove carbon dioxide and moisture. But there's a tricky balance. Too dry and your skin cracks, lips split, throats burn. Too damp and condensation creeps onto every surface, turning your world into a cold sauna. Historians will still argue whether early diesel subs had worse air than their nuclear successors. The old boats used primitive chemical canister soda lime cartridges that absorbed CO, but did nothing for humidity. Nuclear boats introduced automated scrubbers and climate control, yet veterans swear the air felt heavier, maybe because of the long patrols and sealed systems. It's one of those debates with no clear answers, just generations of sailors comparing misery like metals. You run your finger along a pipe and it comes away damp. Condensation, again. It forms constantly inside the sub, wherever warm breath meets cold metal. The Arctic outside can be -40, and the steel hull faithfully transmits that chill inward. Warm, moist air from bidets, cooking, and breathing hits the surface, cools, and leaves behind a thin film of water. Multiply that by dozens of sailors, and you've got indoor rain to fight it. The engineers designed clever tricks. Some surfaces are painted with anti-condensation coating Submarine layers that trap warmth. Others are lined with insulation panels to prevent cold spots. The ventilation system also includes dehumidifiers, little unsung heroes that hum softly behind panels, collecting gallons of water every day. That water is stored in tanks and sometimes reused to flush systems. Every drop counts in this closed ecosystem. Then there's the human side. You notice towels hanging from pipes, shirts drying near vents, socks tucked into corners. Each piece adds moisture to the air, which in turn fogs against the cold walls. The crew becomes obsessive about wiping surfaces, bulkheads, tables, even ceilings. You can picture it. A line of sailors with rags, scrubbing dew-off metal every morning like monks tending a sacred ritual. Quirky fact, some submarines, especially during long Arctic missions, used salt pans, shallow trays filled with salt placed in your warm ducts. The salt absorbed moisture, acting like primitive dehumidifiers. Sailors called them ghost traps, since the salt often turned gray and clumpy, like something from another world. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. As you moved toward the galley, the air thickened slightly. That's the moisture from cooking steam, from coffee, stew bubbling on the stove. It smells wonderful, but every whiff of warmth adds to the condensation battle. You watch as droplets form along the overhead pipes, trembling, then falling with soft plinks onto the floor. The cook mutters under his breath, "Rain again." He's not wrong yet. Rains indoors here more often than outside. You take a seat at the mess table. Feel the faint tackiness of condensation under your fingers. The air is warm but heavy, like breathing through wet cloth. You sip tea strong, sweet, the kind that could strip paint hand. Feel it warming your chest. That warmth fights, not just the Arctic, but the dampness that tries to sneak into your bones. There's an old saying among submariners, cold is patient. The chill doesn't rush. It waits. It creeps in through seams, condenses behind panels, hides in your socks, and finds you when you stop moving. So you learn to stay ahead of it. The ventilation team checks humidity levels hourly. If moisture spikes, they adjust airflow or increase dehumidifier cycles. It's all about equilibrium, keeping the air at just the right balance, where frost doesn't form, but skin doesn't crack. In the early days, before sophisticated sensors, crews used more primitive methods. They'd tape a mirror to the wall and watch how quickly it fogged. If condensation formed too fast, it meant humidity was high. They'd tweak ventilation or hang more salt pans. It was part science, part superstition. One historian once described the interior of a submarine under Arctic ice as a floating tropical cave, warm, wet, and claustrophobic. He wasn't exaggerating. With dozens of people breathing, eating, and sweating in confined space, humidity can reach 70%. That's when condensation becomes an art form. Sailors joked about naming the larger drips. You wipe a droplet from your nose and laugh softly. Even here, humor survives. Someone's scrawled on a pipe, "Don't lick the walls, they bite." You can see why. Touching cold steel with a damp finger can give you a miniature frostburn. A submarine version of a childhood dare gone wrong. Another odd ritual happens every night cycle. Before lights out, a few sailors walk the corridors with cloths, wiping condensation from vents and bulkheads. It's part cleanliness, part meditation. The rhythm of it, the swipe, the wipe, the soft echo feels like tucking the ship in for the night. When they finish, the metal gleams faintly in the red light, clean and dry for another few hours. You pass by the torpedo, room again, and notice frost forming around one of the forward hatches, of thin, sparkling crust like sugar on glass. That's how thin the margin is here. 1 degree too cold, and ice grows inside your world. The chief taps the hatch, frowns, then adjusts a valve. Warm air rushes in, the frost melts, and life goes on. Historians still debate whether submariners in the Arctic truly slept dry. Diaries suggest otherwise. Most nights ended with damp blankets, cold pillow corners, and shirts that never quite dried. Yet, despite it all, they survived. They learned to coexist with condensation, to make peace with moisture. The trick wasn't eliminating it, it was mastering it. You return to your bunk, run your palm across the wall, and feel it smooth and dry for now. The air smells faintly of metal and soap, and the temperature feels balanced again. You settle in, breathing slowly, aware that every inhale and exhale joins the ship's endless loop of recycled air. As your eyes drift closed, you hear the hum of fans, the whisper of ducks, the occasional drip of water. It's oddly soothing. The Arctic may own the ice, but down here, the air belongs to you. The next time you blink awake, the light hasn't changed, but the people have. The bunk above you is empty now. Its occupant is on watch duty, while someone else has quietly slid into the bunk below. That's the rhythm of life down here. Sleep, wake, shift, repeat. You're not just living under the ice, you're living on the clock. It's divided into slices so small that time itself feels mechanical. You stretch in the narrow bunk, your mind foggy from half-sleep, somewhere beyond the bulkhead. You hear the quiet clatter of breakfast prepped, the sound of eggs rehydrating, coffee brewing from powder, a metallic scrape of ladle against pot. It's not the kind of sound that lulls you awake. It reminds you that you're part of a cycle much larger than yourself. Submarines run on watch schedules, usually split into 6-hour rotations. Every crew member belongs to a watch section, 1/3 of the team on duty while the others rest or eat. It's called the watch system, and it keeps the boat running 24 hours a day without pause. 6 hours on, 12 hours off, if you're lucky. Some older boats ran 4 on, 8. Others adjusted for mission needs, which meant you might be shaking someone awake for duty at what your body insists is 2 in the morning. Historians still argue whether this British 6-hour watch was more humane than the American 4-hour dog watch. The records say sailors adjusted quickly. The diaries say otherwise. Sleep fragmentation, exhaustion, and disorientation were constant companions. But necessity doesn't care about circadian rhythms. Machines do not sleep, and so neither can you, at least not all at once. You slide out of your bunk carefully, trying not to jostle the sleeping body below. The deck is cool beneath your socks, and your breath hangs briefly in the recycled air. You glance around. The berthing compartment looks like a dream caught mid-breath. Half the curtains are drawn, half are open. A pair of boots lies perfectly aligned under a ladder. Someone's mug sits abandoned on a shelf, still steaming faintly. Every detail hums with routine. You head toward the galley, where a few sailors are eating in silence. One yawns so wide you can practically hear his jaw click. Another stirs his coffee with robotic precision, eyes half shut. The fatigue here isn't dramatic, it's woven into everything. The soft fuzz around the edges of consciousness. You've been awake for maybe 12 hours straight before. These people do it for weeks, months, without a single sunrise. The cold outside makes everything harder. The Arctic doesn't care that humans need sleep. The boat's constant adjustments, step changes, ice impacts, trim, shift, mean vibrations, noise, movement. The hull groans unexpectedly, or a pump starts at midnight. You never get pure silence. Even when you're off duty, you're half listening. Every clang could mean trouble. There's a phrase sailors use: you don't sleep. You just pass out between alarms. It's only half a joke, but humans are adaptable creatures. Over time, you find ways to hack the system. You learn to nap during your off watch, 20-minute bursts that trick your brain into thinking it's rested. You develop a Pavlovian response. The engine hum your brain, hears it, and says, safe, sleep now. One sailor leans across the table and grins weakly. Best sleep I ever had was in a hurricane, he says. Boat was rocking so bad it felt like a cradle. He spoons powdered eggs into his mouth like it's gourmet cuisine. Humor is a survival skill here. You make your way to the control room, where the next watch is relieving the last. The transition happens quietly, one man sliding out of a chair, another slipping in. They exchange quick nods, not words. Every system must be monitored without interruption. Sonar, propulsion, ballast, life support. There's no margin for tired mistakes, and yet exhaustion finds its way in. A yawning helmsman, a sonar operator blinking too long, an engineer fighting to focus on dials that blur at the edges. Sleep deprivation doesn't hit like a hammer, seeps in like condensation on cold steel during World War II Arctic patrols. The British and German submariners faced the same enemy: fatigue. Both sides kept a strict discipline about rest. Quote, under constant tensioning destroyers, shifting ice, mechanical strain, sleep became currency. Historians still debate whether the Allies' larger crews gave them an advantage. More hands meant shorter watches and more time to rest, but in the claustrophobic pressure of under ice missions, everyone ran on the edge of exhaustion. There's a quirky trick passed down through generations: the pillow swap. Before sleeping, you flip your pillow to the cold side. In the Arctic, it's never warm, but the ritual itself matters. Another superstition: if your bunkmate's just gone on watch, you slide into the warm spot before it cools. It's called hot bunking for a reason. A little weird, sure, but when you're fighting for warmth, etiquette melts like frost. You step aside to let a crewman through, his uniform rumpled, his eyes bloodshot. He gives you a polite nod before disappearing into his bunk, curtain closing like a stage curtain on exhaustion. Within a minute, you hear slow, steady breathing. That's how fast the body shuts down here. To keep everyone sane, the schedule includes micro-rituals, coffee breaks, storytelling during meals, occasional bursts of music through the PA. There's something oddly moving about hearing a faint jazz tune echo through metal corridors while outside. The Arctic rumbles like a sleeping god, and still, you notice how the lack of sunlight warps perception. Some sailors lose track of day and night entirely. Their bodies forget when to sleep naturally. Scientists now call it circadian dysynchrony. Back then, sailors just called it the drift. You feel it too, the sense that time's lost its edges, that you could be living inside a single endless night. To counteract that, modern submarines use artificial lighting cycles: cool white for day, soft red or amber for night. Older crews relied on habit and command announcements. Midwatch, changeover, echoes down the corridors, a phrase that might as well mean, pretend this is morning. You return to your bunk eventually. Fatigue washing over you like static. You've got maybe 4 hours before you're due back on duty. It doesn't matter. Your body knows how to shut down on command now. You close your eyes, feeling the faint vibration under your spine, the breath of recycled air on your face. You drift quickly this time. The hum of the machinery syncs with your heartbeat. Somewhere, a valve hisses softly your lullaby. For a moment, it's almost peaceful. You dream not of the cold or the ice, but of clocks' endless ticking, hands turning in circles, each hour folding into the next. When you wake again, you won't know if it's been minutes or days. That's the magic and the madness of submarine time. You wake again to a sound that's halfway between a heartbeat and a thunderstorm or deep, constant thrum that vibrates through the mattress and up into your bones. It's not just sound anymore. It's sensation. The submarine itself hums, groans, ticks, sighs, and you, being part of it now, hum right along. You don't so much hear the noise as wear it. It's strange to think that this noise, this mechanical symphony, is what helps you sleep. At first, it's maddening. Every creak makes you wonder if the hull's cracking, if the Arctic pressure's chewing on the metal skin of your home. But over time, your brain learns the difference between the comforting noises and the dangerous ones. The engines, good pumps, normal. A sudden metallic ping that doesn't belong. That's when your heart wakes before your mind does. The ocean above presses down with the weight of mountains, and the hull responds like an old ship's bell, moaning softly under stress. Each sound carries information. The sonar operator hears stories in the echoes, distant wails, shifting ice sheets, the faint hum of another vessel miles away. You, half asleep, hear only rhythm. And rhythm, it turns out, is everything. One old submariner once said, "Silence is the scariest sound underwater." He wasn't being poetic. Silence means systems and engines stopped. Power cut. Something wrong. Down here, the lullaby of machinery is the proof of life. It's the heartbeat of the metal beast, keeping you alive in a world that would freeze you, solid in minutes. The hum from the generators blends with a constant whoosh of circulating air. Together, they form a soundscape you can't escape. The odd thing, after a few days, you don't want to, like white noise from a fan. It lulls you into something close to peace. It becomes your background comfort, the soft background hum you told your viewers to turn on before this story began. The acoustics are peculiar, too. Sound travels differently in tight metal spaces. Footsteps echo oddly, voices sound closer than they are, and every dropped wrench becomes a minor explosion. You quickly learn to move quietly, not out of fear, but out of mercy for everyone else trying to rest. The metal amplifies everything. Even a sneeze becomes a communal event. Historians still argue whether Cold War submarines were actually quiet or just quieter. Modern ones use sound-dampening tiles and floating decks, but back in the Arctic Patrol era, everything vibrated. Records show crew complaints about constant rattles, shaking pipes, and the orchestra of the engine room. And yet, these same men claimed they couldn't fall asleep without it. Once they got home, there's something psychological in that dependency, the way the human brain adopts. It takes environments, chaos, as normalcy. You've probably done it too. Gotten used to city noise, a partner snoring, or the hum of a fridge. Down here, it's the same, only louder, and occasionally accompanied by the terrifying groan of 10,000 tons of ice shifting above your head. You walk the narrow passageway toward the stern. The sound grows louder as you near the propulsion section until it feels like standing beside a mechanical waterfall. The floor vibrates just enough to make your teeth buzz. 2 engineers are there, half whispering over a console. One gestures to a gauge, the other nods. They work in that language of hums and hand signals, now words. It's drowned by machinery. You can see condensation trembling on the pipes, catching the dim red light like sweat on muscle. The whole room pulses with life. And here's the paradox. The same heat that keeps you alive feeds into this soundscape. Every vibration, every pump, every spinning turbine releases warmth, turning cold steel into something almost organic. There's a quirky tidbit about World War II. German U-boats, sailors sometimes called their diesel engines singing bees. They claimed each one had a distinct voice, and you could tell if something was wrong just by tone. Modern sailors laugh at that idea, but deep down, they know it's true. Machines have moods. You can feel them as you head back toward your berth. You pass the torpedo room again. The noise changes instantly, a soft hiss of compressed air, the occasional gurgle from ballast adjustments. It's quieter here, though quiet is relative. The air hums with tension, like a held breath. A sailor naps beside one of the racks, his head resting against a crate. You wonder how he can sleep, sitting upright in this metallic symphony. But then you realize he's mastered what all submariners do, tuning the noise into nothing. The trick, they say, is to listen through it, not to it. That's easier said than done. When you lie back in your bunk, every clank, every sigh of pressure, every faint echo from the hull becomes part of your nervous system. The Arctic outside presses harder, okay? And the submarine creaks in reply, a dialogue older than your presence here. Some nights, the noise feels almost alive. You swear you can hear voices and eat a trick of acoustics, maybe, or your overtired brain trying to make sense of randomness. Psychologists studying submarine crews noted how auditory hallucinations increase after long missions. The hum of the ship becomes a canvas for the imagination. Some sailors claim to hear music in it, or whispers. Others, less romantically, say, it's just tinnitus. But whatever it is, it's yours. The sound follows you everywhere. When you close your eyes, it fills the dark behind your eyelids. When you wake, it greets you like an old friend. It's not peace, exactly, yeah, but it's predictability. And that's its own kind of comfort. Historians still debate that the mental toll of this noise was underestimated. Early submariners returned to land unable to sleep in silence. Some recorded turning on vacuum cleaners or radios just to mimic the hum. It's almost funny, the same sound that once signified confinement becomes freedom's echo when it's gone. There's a story, maybe apocryphal, about a sailor who married late in life after decades under the sea. His wife complained he couldn't sleep without the thunder. So he installed a small electric motor under their bed to recreate the vibration of his bunk. Whether true or not, captures something real. The body remembers. You close your eyes again and let the submarine sing to you. The hum steadies your breathing. You count the vibrations the way children count sheep. Each pulse says, alive, alive, alive. The rhythm slows your thoughts, flattens the edges of anxiety. And somewhere between pump hiss and propeller drone, you drift off, and just before sleep takes you, the whole groans softly, as if exhaling. The sound is deep, resonant, half lullaby, half warning. You smile faintly in the dark. You know now, under the Arctic, it's the noise that keeps you warm. You wake up with that dry, metallic taste in your mouth, again half stale air, half machine breath, and for a second, you forget what time it's supposed to be. Then your stomach reminds you, it's mealtime. The galley's already humming, a low chatter of clinking spoons, laughter that sounds half genuine, half desperate. Food, down here, isn't just sustenance. It's strategy. It's warmth. It's the closest thing to sunlight you get under the ice. You squeeze past a few crewmates on the narrow gangway, the smell of coffee thickening as you approach the mess. It's not fancy coffee instant granules dissolved in desalinated water, but it hits like a blessing. The first sip burns, and you feel it trace a line of heat straight down to your stomach. That's how submariners survive the Arctic, not through bravery alone, but through the alchemy of calories and caffeine. There's a quiet truth about life in freezing conditions. Your body becomes a furnace, always burning something. The colder it gets outside, the more fuel you need. Submariners knew this long before scientists wrote about thermogenesis. Cooks loaded every meal with fat and carbs, not because it tasted good, but because it kept your core temperature steady. Think hearty stews, canned meat swimming in gravy, and biscuits so dense they could double as ballast. Historians still argue whether the American or Soviet submariners had the better Arctic rations. U.S. boats leaned toward practicality: powdered eggs, freeze-dried casseroles reconstituted everything. Soviet crews favored heavy bread, cured meats, and pickles, their own version of edible insulation. There's a running joke among naval historians that the Cold War was really a contest between cholesterol levels. You slide onto a bench beside a sailor who's already halfway through his tray. He nods toward the stew. "Mystery meat again," he says, deadpan. You grin. Nobody asks what kind of meat it is. Sits better that way. The warmth it gives off is all that matters. Then comes the hot drink ritual. It's not just coffee. It's tea, cocoa, even the occasional engine room special, a concoction of instant coffee, cocoa powder, and sugar stirred into near boiling water. It tastes like scorched earth and heaven at the same time. Sailors swear it helps them sleep hotter, meaning their bodies retain heat better through the short, fractured sleep cycles. Science would call it nonsense, but the placebo effect has never cared much for evidence. In one corner, a small electric kettle hisses like a coiled snake. The galley is so warm you can see condensation fogging the ceiling again, droplets trembling as the air thickens with heat. There's laughter as someone drops a sugar cube and dives theatrically under the table to retrieve it. You realize that even humor here serves a thermal purpose. It keeps spirits from freezing over faster than fingers. You remember reading somewhere that during Arctic expeditions, explorers used to sleep with hot water bottles tucked into their clothes. On submarines, that role falls to food and drink. The body becomes a radiator: warmth in, warmth out. There's a quirky tradition, especially on older boats. Night cocoa. Just before lights out, someone from the off-watch crew brews up a massive pot of thick, syrupy cocoa. Everyone gets a mug, even those still technically on duty. It's less about taste than temperature. One sailor joked that the cocoa was thick enough to caulk a leak. He wasn't far off. He could probably patch a small hole in the hull if needed. When you finish eating, you lean back and listen to the low murmur of conversation. Food slows time down here. It's one of the only moments when you're not on edge, not rushing to the next task. You can almost imagine you're in some cozy cafe, except the walls are 6 inches of steel, and outside is 1,000 miles of frozen dark. The cook, a wiry man with a perpetual grin, moves between tables. His nickname's Chef Frosty, which makes everyone laugh since he's the warmest person aboard. He's part psychologist, part magician, part miracle worker. When supplies start to dwindle, he turns leftovers into feasts through sheer willpower. Never underestimate what a can of Spam and optimism can do. He tells you, ladle in hand. Historians still debate whether submarines had better morale thanks to their cooks. Some naval officers argued that good food was as vital as good engines. Others dismissed it as unmilitary indulgence, but you can tell who's right just by looking around. After a hot meal, everyone's posture softens. The chatter rises. The laughter gets louder. Warm food rewires the mood. It's science, but also magic. You take another sip of cocoa, feel it coat your throat like molten comfort. You think of home kitchens, of steam fogging windows. Here, the galley becomes that chore shared hearth. You stand in for sunlight. The warmth lingers long after the cup's empty. There's also a secret rule down here. No one eats alone. Even on back-to-back watches, someone always joins you. Isolation is the real cold you have to fight. The Arctic outside might be merciless, but it's the inner chilled loneliness, fatigue, silence that's truly dangerous. And somehow, a shared spoonful of stew becomes a defiant act against it. Every once in a while, the crew gets creative. Someone organizes theme meals. One night, they eat by flashlight, pretending they're camping. Another night, they all wear wool caps to celebrate surviving a month without frostbite. It's ridiculous, but that's the point. Laughter generates its own heat. The weirdest fringe ritual you hear about, toasting the ice, when the boat passes under particularly thick Arctic shelves. Someone, usually the navigator, raises a mug of cocoa and mutters to the ceiling above. It's half joke, half prayer, because they all know the truth. If that ceiling cracks, you're done. After the meal, you walk back to the berthing area, body humming from the inside out. The corridors feel less cold, the hum of machinery more melodic. You pass a small notice taped to a bulkhead. A full stomach is better than a full complaint. A tea, the handwriting's sloppy, but the message lands. You climb into your bunk again, tuck the blanket around your shoulders, and notice that your body feels warmer, heavier. The stew, the tea, the laughter, they've all left a lingering glow. You pull your beanie down over your ears and close your eyes. Outside, the Arctic's still there, an endless dark pressing against the hull. But inside, your belly radiates a quiet heat that defies it. And as you drift off, you think, sometimes survival is as simple as a hot drink in the right hands. You don't notice the cold. First, you notice the stillness. The engines have idled down to their low hum. Tea in the air feels just a little sharper, as if the submarine itself has taken a deep breath and forgotten to exhale. Somewhere, a voice calls softly down the passage. "Doc, you up?" That's never a comforting sound in a place where warmth is measured in body heat and trust. You pull yourself out of your bunk and follow the voice toward the small medical bay, sick bay, they call it, though it's barely the size of a walk-in closet. It smells faintly of iodine, disinfectant, and metal, like every other room on the boat. The ship's corpsman, half nurse, half wizard, is there, checking the hands of a sailor who looks sheepish and cold. His fingers are mottled pale blue. Frostbite, or the start of it. You wouldn't think that possible inside a supposedly heated submarine. But under Arctic ice, temperature regulation is an art form that sometimes fails. The cold seeps through metal faster than you'd believe. If a ventilation flap jams open, or someone works too long near the forward bulkhead, the chill can bite hard. Nothing serious, the corpsman murmurs, rubbing ointment onto the sailor's hands. Just frostnip. He'll live to complain another day. The sailor grins weakly. Guess I should have worn gloves. Can't help but laugh softly. Down here, humor is often the best anesthetic. Submarines, especially the older ones, carried minimal medical facilities, one bed, a locked cabinet of basic drugs, and a set of manuals thick enough to use as armor. Everything else came down to ingenuity. No doctors, just one corpsman trained to handle everything from toothaches to hypothermia to emergency surgery. You try not to imagine what that would look like. Historians still argue whether Arctic submarine crews faced more medical risks from cold or confinement. Some say the biggest threat wasn't frostbite but fungal infections, too much humidity, too little sunlight. Others insist that the constant cold made small injuries dangerous. A blister could turn septic if left untreated. Whatever the statistics say, every sailor knew one truth. In this world of steel and pressure, your body was your most fragile instrument. The corpsman glances up at you. "You warm enough, rookie?" he says. You nod, even though your nose feels cold. He chuckles. "Good. Keep moving. That's the secret. Stillness kills faster than the cold." You leave him to his work and walk toward the bow. Along the corridor, you notice how everyone layers their uniforms differently. Some wrap scarves under their collars. Some wear thick socks over thin ones. Some tuck newspapers under shirts, trick borrowed from World War II sailors who swore it worked better than any modern thermal liner. There's even an ongoing argument about whether eating before sleeping helps. Some claim a full stomach keeps you warmer. Others say digestion steals body heat. Historians still debate which navy first encouraged bed snacks for Arctic crews. The British favored biscuits and jam. The Americans leaned toward chocolate. One journal even mentions a commander who issued nightly orders for hot cocoa and a slab of butter per man. You can, practically, hear cardiologists weeping from the future. But the real secret to avoiding frost injuries wasn't food, it was routine. Every watch shift began with a body check: gloves, socks, boots, and ears. If someone looked pale or slow to react, others noticed. The unspoken rule was simple: you don't let anyone freeze quietly. You pause near the hatch to the torpedo room, where one crewman is checking seals. His breath fogs in front of him, even indoors. He rubs his arms and mutters, "Feels like a freezer in here." You hand him a spare towel from the laundry line, and he wraps it around his neck. Improvisation keeps morale alive. There's a quirky piece of folklore that circulates among Arctic submariners, something called the heat thief. According to the tale, every boat has one, a mischievous spirit that sneaks warmth away from bunks and boots. When someone wakes up freezing, they blame the heat thief, not the failing insulation. It's part joke, part superstition, part coping mechanism. You can almost imagine it, a little ghost darting through ducts, stealing socks just to watch people shiver. The corpsman, though, believes more in checklists than ghosts. He keeps a meticulous log of cabin temperatures, humidity levels, and crew health. If someone starts coughing too much, he checks air filters. If a bunk stays damp, he orders it aired out. On the surface, these are minor tasks, but in this closed ecosystem, they're survival rituals. He once told a journalist that his biggest enemy wasn't frostbite, but apathy. The cold only wins when you stop caring, he said. When you stop checking, stop talking, stop laughing. That's when it gets you. See what he means? The real frost creeps in through silence. Still, accidents happen. The ship's medical logs tell stories. A sailor who lost feeling in 2 toes after sleeping near a ventilation leak. Another who burned his fingers on overheated pipe saruni at its finest. The corpsman's job is part caretaker, part confessor. He listens to fears disguised as stomach aches, loneliness masked as headaches. You can tell he's everyone's unofficial therapist one evening. During your off watch, an alarm briefly rings a pressure warning. Nothing catastrophic, just a valve adjustment gone wrong. But the brief chill that follows feels like the Arctic reaching its hand inside. The temperature drops a few degrees in minutes. Crewmen rush to seal vents, and the corpsman checks for anyone showing shiver responses. No one panics. They've rehearsed this 100 times. The rhythm of survival is its own kind of lullaby. Later, when things settle, the air feels warmer again. Though maybe that's just your imagination. The corpsman passes by, gives you a thumbs up, and says, "Still got all your fingers. Good. Keep it that way," you chuckle, rubbing your hands together. You realize how thin the line is between comfort and catastrophe. Here, how quickly warmth can vanish, how every breath depends on maintenance and luck. The thought should terrify you, but instead, it humbles you. Humans built this steel bubble, sailed it under crushing ice, and learned to sleep anyway. Before you return to your bunk, you glance once more into the medical bay. The light glows soft and steady. The sailor from earlier is asleep now, hands bandaged lightly. The corpsman hums under his breath, organizing supplies. The sound is oddly soothing, like the ocean breathing through the hole. You crawl back into your bunk, fingers warm, air humming faintly. The Arctic presses close, outside, waiting for weakness, but inside the submarine, the crew's small rituals hold it at bay. You smile into the dark, thinking of the heat thief, and decide, just this once, to let him go hungry. When you wake next, You don't feel the cold first or the hum of machinery, you feel the mood of the boat. You can tell instantly that this is a tired day. The laughter is thinner, the footsteps slower, and the air itself seems heavier. Life in a submarine isn't just mechanical, it's deeply psychological. The Arctic doesn't just test your body, it tests your mind. And sleep in this pressurized world depends as much on your mental warmth as your thermal one. You pull aside the curtain and step into the corridor. A sailor shuffles past you, mumbling to himself, eyes glazed with that 1,000-yard stare of exhaustion. He's probably been awake for 30 hours, running drills or fixing something that broke at the worst possible time. Yet, when he spots you, he manages a lopsided grin. That's the camaraderie of it. Everyone here knows exactly how much everyone else is holding together by thread. There's a coffee mug taped to a pipe with the words "Sanity, Preservation Device" written in marker. You chuckle softly. That's how humor works. Down here, teeny jokes pinned to walls like lucky charms. Each one's a micro dose of hope. As you move toward the galley, you notice 2 sailors arm wrestling at the mess table, their laughter echoing in the cramped space. It's not competition, it's therapy. The loser has to recite a limerick over the intercom later. The stakes are silly on purpose. The silliness is the point. Historians still argue whether morale aboard Arctic submarines was more crucial than equipment. The official reports praise discipline and efficiency, but the diaries tell the truth. Humor, small rituals, and shared absurdity kept the crews human. A well-timed joke did more for survival than any steel bulkhead ever could. You sit beside one of the younger sailors, who's carving something into a piece of scrap wood. "What's that?" you ask. He shrugs, smiling. "Just a good luck charm. And I hang it over my bunk." It's a crude little totem, shaped like a penguin, wrong pole entirely, but somehow perfect. Everyone on board has something like it. A coin, a photo, a doodle taped near their pillow. Tiny personal anchors in a sea of sameness. The commander strolls by, some coffee in hand, pretending not to notice the carving session. "As long as it doesn't jam a valve, I don't care what religion it belongs to," he mutters, deadpan. The crew snickers. Later, in the control room, the tone shifts again. The navigator hums under his breath some old pop tune from the 70s. It's out of tune, but it fills the silence. When he stops, another sailor picks up the melody, almost unconsciously. This is how people cope, by turning monotony into music. There's even a nightly ritual now, the story game. After the final watch, a few sailors gather in the mess, lights dimmed to that soothing red glow. One person starts a story, the next continues it. The rules are simple: no war talk, no real people, no tragedy, just imagination. Last night's tale involved a polar bear learning to play the accordion. The ending didn't make sense, but that wasn't the point. It's the act of storytelling, the creation of something gentle inside an unkind world that keeps the ice from seeping into their heads. One sailor once wrote in his log, "We talk ourselves warm." You feel that truth tonight. Every laugh, every tale, every inside joke becomes another layer of insulation. A quirky tidbit: the Soviets had something called warm light hours, where all unnecessary work paused for tea, songs, and laughter. Western submariners teased them for it, but later studies suggested it drastically improves sleep quality and morale. It turns out that joy is measurable and, apparently, contagious. There's another habit that emerges among crews over time: synchronized routines. You notice that everyone brushes their teeth at the same time, eats together, even naps in near unison. It's unspoken, but it creates rhythm, a kind of social heartbeat. In the chaos of watch rotations, these small points of unity are grounding. They remind you that you're not adrift in this metal cocoon alone. Psychologists who studied submarine crews later called it collective coping. You'd probably just call it friendship, forged under pressure. You see it when a sailor wakes another gently from a nightmare, instead of shaking him. You see it when someone secretly replaces another's socks because the old pair has holes. There's no grand heroism, just quiet decency. The funny thing is, you start to realize that every laugh, every teasing insult, every shared cup of cocoa before sleep all of is designed to make the same thing possible. Rest. Without trust, you can't sleep down here. You'd lie awake, imagining cracks in the hall or engines failing. But trust, that's what lets you close your eyes and drift off, knowing someone's keeping watch. There's a moment one evening when the whole crew gathers in the control room after a long, nerve-wracking sonar contact. Turns out it was a drifting iceberg, not another submarine. The tension breaks instantly. Someone pops open a tin of preserved peaches contraband dessert and passes them around. You take a bite, and it tastes absurdly luxurious, sweet, cold, and alive. Historians still debate whether such morale rituals were officially sanctioned or quietly tolerated. On paper, discipline ruled. In practice, humanity leaked through the cracks, the way warmth leaks through a closed hatch. Later that night, you're lying in your bunk, and you can hear laughter echo faintly from the mess below, rolling sound that vibrates through the pipes. It's soothing. You think of the penguin carving, the peach celebration, the shared songs. You realize that while technology keeps you breathing, it's the people who keep you warm. There's an unspoken exchange happening constantly here. I'll watch your back, you watch mine. I share my cocoa, you share your story. Each act layers another invisible blanket over the crew. The submarine isn't just metal and circuits, it's woven from human gestures. You drift off. The hum of the engines softened by distant laughter. It feels almost like being rocked by an old lullaby you've known forever, though the lyrics have changed to match the rhythm of steel and ice. Somewhere, someone snores. Someone mutters a joke in his sleep. Someone whispers, "Good night, you frostbitten lunatics," and a muffled laugh answers from the dark. And for a brief, perfect moment, it feels like the Arctic outside doesn't exist at all. The klaxon doesn't sound like a scream, it's more of a metallic roar that claws through your sleep and yanks you upright before your brain catches up. Emergency drill. Your body knows the sequence before you do. Boots, jacket, latch, run. The temperature difference slaps you in the face as you spill into the corridor. It's colder here, unnervingly so. You're not under attack. Not yet. This is a cold breach simulation, one of the most unpleasant words in the Arctic submarine vocabulary. It's the moment everyone pretends that a seal has failed and the ocean's chill has found its way inside. The first time you do it, you laugh nervously. The 5th time, you grit your teeth. The 10th, you stop pretending. Even as a drill, the cold feels personal. Sailors hurry past, voices clipped but calm. Close secondary valves. Check thermal lines. Someone yells for the corpsman. Even he knows this is practice, but procedure doesn't care. The air drops another few degrees. You can see your breath now. It's floating like ghostly threads in the red emergency lights. The strange thing about Arctic submarines is that they practice for everything from fire to flooding to freezing. You'd think the ocean above would be enough danger, but the cold is the one enemy that never stops testing you. Historians still argue whether early Cold War submarines were overconfident in their insulation or underprepared for sustained Arctic missions. Some say the first American nuclear subs, like USS Nautilus, relied too heavily on engine heat and crew bravado. Others insist those engineers knew exactly how to design for polar extremes. You suspect both are true. Necessity breeds arrogance, and survival justifies it. In this drill, the command crew simulates a leak in the forward compartment. Instantly, a handful of sailors race to contain it, while others start the rapid warm-up routine, closing vents, rerouting heat, distributing extra layers. Someone hands you a flask of what they call engine tea, hot water that tastes faintly of machine oil. It's disgusting, but the warmth hits your stomach like a campfire. You can tell who's new by how they shiver. Veterans have mastered the art of shivering strategically small tremors, rhythmic, almost meditative. They claim it generates just enough heat without draining energy. Science backs them up, supposedly. You give it a try and realize they might be right. The drill lasts 20 minutes, long enough for your fingers to ache, short enough to keep morale intact. When it's over, the commander's voice crackles over the intercom. Good containment, no casualties. If this were real, we'd all still be alive. Mostly. The laughter that follows is the relieved kind, back in the mess. The cuckoo doubles as the unofficial morale officer has already set out mugs of cocoa. He claims it's laced with something classified and chocolatey. You sip it, still trembling slightly. The ritual warmth returns. It's absurd and human and perfect. There's an ongoing superstition about these drills. If you complain afterward, the sea will make the next one real. So everyone smiles, even the ones with chattering teeth. You'll pretend it's fine, and somehow becomes fine. A quirky historical tidbit during World War II. Some German U-boats conducted Arctic patrols where actual freezing leaks occurred. Crews reportedly wrapped themselves in oil-soaked rags because the fabric retained heat longer. Others claim they burned bits of insulation foam in tin cans to keep toes from going numb. The smell must have been horrendous, but, as one diary put it, warmth forgives ugliness. The modern submarine is a far cleaner machine, but the instincts remain the same. The fear of sudden cold is primal. You imagine that if the temperature truly dropped too far, the hull cracked or a vent froze, you'd see frost blooming across the metal like an alien flower. It's beautiful in theory, fatal in practice. After the drill, the corpsman gathers the crew and reviews what went right. You stand nearby, listening. Remember, he says, we don't fight the cold, we outsmart it. He points to the thermostat logs. Rapid sealing saves lives, but it's the warm-up protocol that saves sanity. That rapid warm-up is a fascinating dance. First, warm liquids, tea, broth, even saltwater foot baths. Then, gradual exposure to heated air. Never jump straight to hot temperatures, he warns, or you risk shock. You file that away, half imagining the world above, icebergs, crushing black water, and you've just a tiny pulse of warmth in all that frozen darkness. Historians still debate whether early Arctic drills were excessive or essential. Some veterans called them psychological torture with paperwork. Others credited them for saving hundreds of lives. The consensus: practice may not make perfect, but it keeps you from panicking when the real cold comes calling as you stretch your numb hands. One sailor jokes, I'm adding professional shiverer to my resume. Another quips, only if you pass the advanced class teeth chatter in Morse code. The laughter breaks whatever tension lingers. Later, in your bunk, you're still a little cold. Your body trembles in small waves that match the rhythm of the engines. But strangely, you don't mind? There's a satisfaction in having endured, in knowing that even a mock emergency reveals the crew's resilience. You realize that these drills are less about protocol and more about faith, that if the Arctic does come knocking, you'll meet it together. Layered in trust and thermal underwear, you pull your blanket tighter and think, of the absurdity of it all. Humans building a pressurized steel capsule, diving under frozen oceans, and pretending it's home. You smile into the dark. Somewhere above, ice shifts with a sound like distant thunder. Inside, warmth hums in quiet defiance. You close your eyes and imagine the cold outside as a living Thinga giant, Caitian animal that circles the submarine, waiting. And yet, every heartbeat, every breath, every small, ridiculous joke keeps it at bay, because that's the truth of it. In a world built of metal and ice, survival isn't loud or heroic. It's 1,000 tiny acts of defiance, a shared blanket, a bad pun, a sip of lukewarm cocoa, and the quiet confidence that you can do it all again tomorrow. By the time the drill fatigue fades, the Arctic has become part of your bloodstream. You don't think about it consciously anymore. The knowledge that a million tons of ice sits somewhere above your head just feels like background pressure, like gravity or hunger. You move, breathe, and sleep inside that reality. Tonight, though, the hum of the engines has a different timbre, slower, deeper. You realize the submarine is creeping through another kind of cold, the Cold War itself. This is the part of the voyage where history pulls up a chair. The commander calls it silent running. It sounds peaceful, but really means no sound, no slip-ups, no heat signatures that might make us visible. Yeah. The air cools a little more than usual. The heaters stay low to avoid energy spikes. Everyone speaks in whispers. It's the stealth equivalent of holding your breath. You're sailing in the wake of ghosts. Now, it's real patrols from the 1940s through the 1980s, when submarines prowled beneath Arctic ice, invisible and sleepless. USS Nautilus, USS Skate, K3 Leninsky Komsomolets had its moment of frozen glory and silent terror. They mapped what no sonar could, threading through the underworld of the North Pole while pretending they weren't terrified. Imagine it. August 1958. The Nautilus becomes the first vessel to travel under the North Pole. The crew sleeps in 6-hour fragments. Air, heavy with diesel scent and fear. The thermometer inside shows a comforting 20 degrees Celsius. But outside, water hovers at freezing, ready to murder the careless. They can't surface if anything goes wrong. The ice above is too thick. You think about that as you adjust your blanket and suddenly feel grateful for every functioning heater aboard. AMANSTREAM. Historical fact. During those missions, the crews often use sonar pings to measure ice thickness and navigation paths, but that same sonar risked revealing their position to Soviet subs. So, they pinged sparingly, meaning their maps were half guesswork, half prayer. When you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The eerie, single ping echoing through miles of dark water. Sleep on those patrols wasn't a luxury. It was rationed like fuel. One officer's journal from the Skate describes it. We lay down in layers like sardines, the cold pressing up from the hull. I could feel my breath crystallize before I swallowed it back. It wasn't being poetic. That condensation froze sometimes. The crew wiped it away each morning, pretending not to notice. Historians still argue whether the psychological toll of those missions outweighed their strategic value. The Arctic submarine program was both a scientific milestone and a stress test for human endurance. Crews reported bizarre dreams, phantom sounds, and moments of group hallucination voices in the sonar, whispers through the vents. Scientists later blamed carbon dioxide buildup, but some sailors swore the ice itself was talking. You wouldn't rule it out. A quirky tidbit. One British sub on an Arctic mission in the 1970s carried a single acoustic guitar. It became the unofficial morale barometer. Someone strummed, things were fine. If it stayed silent, everyone got edgy. On particularly rough nights, the captain would request a song for temperature control. As he put it, the joke stuck tonight. The commander orders a reduced heat cycle. Again, less power means less traceable infrared signature. The air thins and cools quickly. You rub your hands, realizing that the line between historical account and your own experience is blurring. The crew still uses the same logic. Conserve warmth, conserve sound, conserve sanity to distract yourself. You head to the navigation room, where a veteran named Ortiz is charting the route with almost meditative focus. His pencil scratches softly on the map. You know, he says, without looking up. The Skate surfaced through ice at the North Pole in 1959. They celebrated with a snowball fight on the hull. He grins. Hardcore frostbite tourism. You laugh quietly. Sounds worth it. Only if you like pain, he replies. But they said the silence up there was holding, like the earth was asleep. That sticks with you. The thought that somewhere beneath all this tension and machinery, there's a stillness so complete it feels sacred. You realize the Arctic itself might be the only thing that truly sleeps here as the night stretches. The submarine drifts through zones of shifting temperature. The air becomes clammy near the aft section, warm near the galley. You walk slowly, feeling the microclimates like invisible ghost pockets of human persistence. Every patch of warmth is a victory. One corner of the control room has a photo pinned up, a frozen ocean. A man standing on a surface sub with steam rising around him. Someone's scrawled beneath it, proof we made the ice sweat. It's defiance distilled into a single image. Historians still debate which navy first mastered under Wright's navigation. Americans cite Nautilus and Skate. The Russians counter with Catherine. Both had their disasters. One early Soviet crew reportedly lost heat entirely when a valve froze shut. They rotated shifts, standing near the reactor chamber for warmth. You wince, imagining the radiation trade-off. Still, they survived. Humans have always been willing to dance too close to their own inventions. Hours later, you find yourself in the galley again. The cook has taped another sign to the wall. No Cold War in my kitchen. He's ladling out soup that smells like garlic and engine grease. You take a bowl, sip, and almost believe it's gourmet. Warmth, again, disguised as humor. Someone nearby murmurs, if the Soviets are doing this too, I hope they're eating better than us. Maybe they're saying the same thing about us. Another answers. That's when it hits you, the shared humanity under all this division. Two sets of submariners, different flags, same frostbitten toes, same longing for sunlight. Both lying awake sometimes, counting the creaks of the hull and pretending not to be afraid. You finish your soup, thank the cook, and head back toward your bunk. The submarine sways slightly. Somewhere above, ice grounds. You lie down, the hum of the engine steady, the air faintly metallic. You think of those long-ago patrols, the silent crews, the snowball fights, the frostbitten heroes who made it possible for you to even imagine sleeping under the Arctic. You feel connected to them through time, like you've joined a lineage of cold dreamers. The lights dim further, the color bleeding to soft red. You listen to the submarine's heartbeat and drift toward sleep, half expecting to dream of ice that speaks and oceans that remember names. You wake up to laughter, not the kind that bursts, but the slow, conspiratorial kind that ripples through the air like a shared secret. You blink, still half in a dream, and see two sailors crouched near the heater grill, whispering. One's holding what looks like a pair of socks attached to a tin can. The other's stirring something with a spoon that's definitely seen better days. You rub your eyes. Morning experiment. You ask. They both grin like guilty kids. Improvement, one says. Foot warmer 2.0. You shuffle closer, curious. Inside the can is a mix of hot water, coffee grounds, and toothpaste. The improvised contraption radiates faint heat and the unmistakable smell of minty despair. We call it the polar toaster, the inventor declares proudly. You laugh so hard, you nearly wake the next shift. Does it work? Depends what you mean by work, the other sailor says, slipping his damp socks over the can. It's warm, and it keeps the coffee from freezing. That's two birds. Welcome to the world of fringe solutions, the endless, absurd ingenuity that thrives when necessity freezes everything else. On an Arctic submarine, every ounce of comfort is homemade. You pass by the mess later and find someone taping a strip of aluminum foil behind a bunk light to reflect radiant heat. Another has stuffed his pillowcase with crumpled paper towels to simulate feathers. The corpsman has confiscated a candle made from melted butter and thread. He sighs like a disappointed parent, muttering, "We're one bad idea away from burning down the Arctic." Historians still argue whether submarine folklore counts as legitimate engineering history. Official manuals, list temperature regulation procedures. But the diaries reveal a parallel science, chaotic, creative, and strangely effective world of hacks. One 1944 note from a British sub describes how sailors lined their bunks with maps because the waxy coating keeps out the chill. Another mentions stuffing socks with crushed biscuits. Apparently, the crumbs trapped air. It didn't smell great, but it worked. There's a certain poetry to this inventiveness. Humans, reduced to their simplest problem-solving instincts, surrounded by metal and water, still finding ways to make life just slightly more bearable. The Arctic has a way of humbling even the most advanced machines. No matter how sophisticated the design, someone always ends up improvising with string and tape. Once, during a patrol in the 1960s, a heater malfunctioned mid-route, and the crew of a U.S. sub resorted to rerouting engine exhaust through coffee tins just to warm their hands. Another sub supposedly kept a hairdryer in the sonar room classified as non-essential equipment, and it saved lives during a frost event. You walk through the living quarters, noticing all the subtle tweaks people have made. One sailor wraps a scarf around his bunk rails to stop drafts. Another has glued bits of old foam insulation to the underside of his mattress. Someone's even hung a thermal blanket like a tent, transforming the tiny space into a cocoon of recycled warmth. It's oddly cozy, like camping in a refrigerator that's trying to kill you. It's a quirky tidbit you pick up in conversation. Back in the early 20th century, some polar explorers believed that sleeping with one's head elevated helped conserve heat. Supposedly, it encouraged blood flow to the brain, though modern physiology would argue otherwise. Still, a few submariners keep that superstition alive, propping pillows like miniature thrones. Better to be a warm fool than a frozen genius, one mutters. Not all experiments succeed. Someone tried microwaving socks once, not realizing the fibers were synthetic. The resulting stench haunted the entire aft compartment for days. You can't help but laugh when you hear the story. That, says the engineer dryly, is why we can't have nice things. But every failure teaches something. You learn that even in controlled environments, comfort is unpredictable. A single misaligned vent can turn one bunk into a sauna and the next into an icebox. So people adapt. They become amateur meteorologists of the microclimate, reading condensation patterns and airflow as if they were omens. There's a rumor going around. Tonight, one sailor claims he's built a mini sauna inside a storage locker using only a hairdryer and a metal pan. The others doubt him, but when you peek inside, the air is genuinely warmer. He grins, eyes shining with victory. I call it the Banya Sub Deluxe. Hugh clap, because, honestly, it's genius. Historians still debate whether this creative streak was officially tolerated or quietly ignored. Regulations frowned on tampering with anything electrical, but captains often turned a blind eye. They knew that a warm, amused crew was a functioning crew, and besides, half these forbidden ideas actually worked. You start to see it differently, not as foolish tinkering, but as a survival language. Each modification is an act of rebellion against the cold. I whispered, "Not today," to the Arctic's indifference. Even humor itself becomes a survival tool. Someone scrawls on the wall near the galley, "Welcome to the ice spa. Hypothermia optional." Another adds, "Bring your own towel." It's all part of the same impulse. Turn the unbearable into the absurd until it stops feeling like doom. One evening, the commander himself joins the laughter. He pulls a dented tin from his Coda relic from a 1950s Arctic patrol. Inside is a lump of wax and an old match. They used this, he says, to warm rations when the stoves froze. A single flame, 3 men, 1 can of beans. He pauses, smiling. They said it tasted like victory. If you imagine it, 3 men huddled around a flickering light, sharing heat and hunger and hope. You can almost smell the beans, metallic and sweet. That's the thing about these eccentric solutions. They're not just about warmth. They're about agency. The Arctic takes control of everything. But when someone builds a makeshift heater or invents a game to distract from the cold, they take a little control back. As you settle into your bunk, you spot the polar toaster again, sitting proudly by the vent, socks still drying. Its inventors are asleep, snoring softly, their toes undoubtedly warm. You smile. It's ridiculous and wonderful. You think about all the other contraptions across history, the biscuit, socks, the butter candles, the hairdryer, sauna sand, realize they're all the same story. Humanity's refusal to lie down quietly in the face of discomfort. You turn off the light, and the submarine hums gently around you. The Arctic presses close, but you're cocooned in invention and laughter. Somewhere, an old piece of foil reflects a little more warmth your way, and you murmur a quiet thank you to the ghosts of clever fools who thought to try it first. By now, the rhythm of the submarine feels like your own pulse, steady, mechanical, oddly soothing. You know every hum and creak by heart, the way you know the cadence of your own breathing. And yet, as the days stretch on under that endless ceiling of ice, the talk on board shifts again. The mood isn't just survival anymore. It's curiosity. The crew starts debating what the next generation of submariners will face. How much science can actually improve on this strange equilibrium between warmth and cold. You catch a few of them arguing near the control room, half whisper, half banter. Smart suits, one insists. The Navy's already testing them. Tiny filaments that regulate temperature automatically. Another snorts. Yeah, and next they'll have pajamas that sing lullabies. Chew quinonously. You'd buy those pajamas. They're talking about thermal regulation tech. Of course, materials that can sense skin temperature and adjust conductivity in milliseconds. The idea isn't far-fetched. Some prototypes already exist. Adapted fabrics laced with graphene or phase-change gels that store body heat like tiny batteries. Imagine it no more frostbitten toes or condensation freezing on pipes. Just a constant, perfect cocoon of warmth, like sleeping inside a friendly computer. Historians still argue whether this evolution of comfort represents progress or over-engineering. Old-timers claim the hardship-bonded crews forged resilience. Take away the cold, one veteran says in an interview, and you take away the camaraderie. Modern engineers roll their eyes, or we take away frostbite. Which would you prefer? The debate is ongoing, and you can feel both sides tugging inside you. There's something romantic about the image of sailors wrapping themselves in foil and duct tape like Arctic superheroes, but there's also something profoundly human about wanting better. You can't help imagining what a submarine 50 years from now might look like. Maybe the bunks will have personal microclimates, temperature bubbles tuned to each sleeper's body. Maybe air circulation will mimic ocean currents, ebbing and flowing naturally, so that no corner ever feels stale. Perhaps the hum of machinery will be replaced by white noise designed to lull the brain into perfect rest. You laugh softly. Alexa, warm my blanket. You whisper to no one in particular. The idea feels equal parts absurd and inevitable. One of the engineers shows you a tablet, modern insulation, schematics, fluid loops that recover waste heat from everything, engines, computers, even lights. This, he says, tapping the display, is how we beat the Arctic now. Every calorie counts. You notice that he says we, even though most of his tech is theoretical. Pride in the human project, you suppose? He flips to another page, showing oxygen recyclers and moisture condensers, sleek and compact. You remember the earlier days' clunky dehumidifiers, dripping pipes, socks hung like prayer flags to dry. It's hard not to admire the evolution. Still, he sighs. Even with all this, people forget the psychological temperature. You can make the air perfect, but if someone's mind freezes, nothing helps. You nod. That's the part no sensor can fix. Later, you overhear another conversation in the galley. This one's between the cook and the historian assigned to document life on board. The cook gestures with a ladle. So, Doc, what's your fancy term for how we don't all go nuts? The historian smiles. Adaptive emotional thermoregulation. The cook blinks. You mean jokes and cocoa. Precisely. That phrase sticks in your head. Adaptive emotional thermoregulation. It sounds clinical, but really it's the same old wisdom. Keep each other warm, inside and out. A quirky tidbit the historian shares during recent Arctic missions. Researchers found that virtual sunlight LED panels mimicking dawn and dusk improve sleep and reduced mood swings dramatically. It's a gentle reminder that the body, for all its toughness, still craves rhythm, color, and illusion. The submariners of the past had to fake sunlight with memory. Now, it's programmable. You wander toward the aft section later, where the hull curves tight and the temperature dips a little. You press your palm to the metal. It's cold, yes, but not cruel. The insulation hums beneath, doing its quiet, invisible work. You imagine all the layered systems working in harmony. Sensors, filters, heaters, dehumidifiers, all descendants of those clumsy hacks and improvised foil panels. Every circuit owes something to a sailor's desperate idea. Historians still debate who deserves credit for specific breakthroughs. Some say it was the engineers and labs. Others argue it was the crews who tested, broke, and rebuilt everything with tape and stubbornness. Theory without frostbite. One old commander used to say, it's just imagination. Think of that line while walking past a wall of tools. Each one feels like an artifact from an evolving species, humans learning to turn suffering into design. The submarine itself is a timeline of innovation. Every valve, every gasket, every heat exchanger, a story about how far people will go to stay alive comfortably. And yet, despite the future tech dreams, there's a wistfulness in the crew. One sailor murmurs, if everything's perfect, do we lose the bragging rights? Another answers, if everything's perfect. We finally sleep through the night. Both have a point. There's even a quiet, scholarly debate playing out among naval historians. Did the hardships of the early Arctic submariners create a unique breed of sailor, half explorer, half philosopher? Some say yes. Others argue it was simply necessity dressed up as nobility. Either way, their legacies shape this moment, you lying in a climate-controlled bunk, wrapped in layers of history and innovation. You close your eyes and imagine both worlds overlapping, the ancient foil hacks and the futuristic, smart fabrics, the polar toaster humming beside a graphene heater, the butter candle flickering beside LED panels. It's tuned to simulate a sunrise over the North Pole. It's absurd and beautiful, a continuity of warmth across centuries. In that moment, you realize that technology may evolve endlessly, but the instinct behind it never changes. It's not just about heat, it's about hope, defiance, and a refusal to surrender comfort to the void. You drift toward sleep, surrounded by humming machinery that seems to breathe with you. The air is neither too warm nor too cold, just perfect. Somewhere in that balance lies everything humanity has learned from the Arctic. Control what you can, adapt to what you can't, and keep laughing through the rest. You wake for the final time on this journey to find the submarine drifting in stillness beneath the ice. The engine's quieted to a low, rhythmic hum that feels more like a heartbeat than a machine. The air is cool and dry, the lights dimmed to their nighttime glow. You've grown used to it, all the claustrophobic warmth, the recycled air, the faint hum that never stops. It's funny how even the Arctic, for all its hostility, can start to feel like home when you've survived it long enough. A voice crackles softly over the intercom. We'll surface at first light. You smile at the phrase, though there hasn't been real light here in weeks. Still, it's something to hold on to, a symbolic dawn breaking through the dark ocean above as you pull yourself from the bunk. Your body remembers every cramped movement, every contorted pose you've used to sleep. You stretch in a narrow corridor, touching the cold ceiling with your fingertips. Somewhere down the hall, someone yawns, another curses the alarm, and a few others laugh quietly about a dream that felt too real. Life in the still will goes on, as it always does, ordinary people doing extraordinary things quietly. You think back to how it started, your first breath of metallic air, the frost on the pipes, the anxious awareness of being so close to both survival and disaster. Now, it all feels softened, domesticated. Even the fear has found its rhythm. That's the strange magic of endurance. The impossible becomes routine in the mess. Someone's pouring the last of the cocoa powder into a dented mug. Another sailor teases. That's classified rationing, you know. The cook shrugs. It's the end of the patrol. Let them court-martial me in a sauna. You grin. You'll miss the humor that stitched everyone together when warmth and reason were both in short supply. Quirky tidbit floats through your thoughts, apparently. Soviet submariners used to mark the end of each Arctic voyage by melting a small block of ice on the mess table, watching it turn to water as a kind of ritual. The symbolism wasn't lost on them, from frozen isolation to liquid movement, from stillness back to flow. Someone once called it the slow thaw of sanity. You can relate. Historians still argue whether the Arctic missions were triumphs of engineering or acts of reckless defiance. Did humanity conquer nature or just survive long enough to brag about it? No one seems to agree, and maybe that's the point. The Arctic never cared for our opinions, it just demanded our best. And down here, in the dim hum of steel, you gave it exactly that. You take a slow walk through the sleeping quarters one last time. Every bunk tells a story. The patched insulation, the foil reflectors, the improvised foot warmers, tiny monuments to ingenuity. Each represents not just the fight against freezing, but the stubborn insistence that comfort matters, even at the edge of the world. You can almost hear echoes of the sailors before you, the laughter, the arguments, the weary sighs. They all left a trace, warmth that doesn't show up on any thermometer. You pass by the engineer station. Here a small note is taped to the bulkhead. Warmth is borrowed, not owned. Return it when you can. It makes you pause. Because that's what this whole adventure has really been about, hasn't it? Borrowing warmth from machines, from each other, from the fragile spark of humor that refuses to die out in the cold. Soon, the submarine begins to rise. You feel the gentle shift in pressure, the subtle pop in your ears. Outside, the Arctic presses down harder, reluctant to let go. The sound of cracking ice filters through the whole soft, almost musical. You imagine the surface above, vast, pale, and endless. A frozen ceiling breaking apart to let you breathe again as the vessel ascends. You think of every generation that endured this same ritual. The early explorers who froze in wooden ships, the wartime crews who risked everything in steel tubes, the modern scientists mapping ice cores and thermal currents. Different centuries, same heartbeat. Humans have always looked at the cold and said, we'll make this livable. It's humbling, really. You started this story wondering how they didn't freeze to death. Now you understand. They didn't just fight the cold. They befriended it, learned its rhythm, bargained with it until both sides could coexist. You make your way to the small viewing port. The ice outside glows faintly blue, fracturing in lazy, elegant patterns as the sub pushes upward. It's not violent, not dramatic, just inevitable. The world softens at the edges, light bleeding in through cracks like a promise. When the surface finally opens, you can almost taste the difference in the air, fresher, colder, real. A sailor nearby whispers, we made it, as if afraid the Arctic might still hear and change its mind. You smile, we always do. Then, for a brief moment, everything goes still. The engines idle, the chatter fades, and the ocean itself seems to pause. You close your eyes and listen to the faint crackle of frost melting on the hull. It's a sound that feels like an ending and a beginning at once. You realize that sleep here was never just about rest. It was about surrendering to the machinery, the cold, the uncertainty, trusting that the warmth you've created together would hold until morning. And somehow, it always did. You climb back into your bunk one last time. Not because you're tired, but because the ritual feels sacred now. The mattress sighs, the blanket smells faintly of metal and detergent, and somewhere in the vents, the recycled air hums like a lullaby. You whisper into the dimness, "Good night, Arctic." The submarine hums back, and with that, your mind begins to drift, slow and heavy, like the vessel itself slipping beneath the ice once more. You imagine all the stories layered beneath you, every laugh, every trick, every heartbeat that dared to warm itself against the impossible cold. The past and present blur until the hum becomes a pulse, and the pulse becomes a sigh, and you let it all fade. The last thought before you sleep isn't about survival or history or even warmth. It's simply gratitude for the fragile, ridiculous brilliance of being human. In a way, even in the darkest, coldest places, we find ways to make it feel like home. Now the hum fades to a whisper, and the edges of everything begin to soften. The submarine drifts, motionless, in a sea of slow-moving light. You feel your breath sinking with the rhythm of the deep to steady inhale, the long, quiet exhale. There's no hurry now, no frost, no noise, just that calm pulse carrying you further from WAKEFULNESS. Imagine the warmth still lingering in the air. It's that small miracle you built together. It stays with you, like the afterglow of laughter or the soft imprint of a dream you don't quite remember. The cold no longer feels like an enemy. It's just another texture of silence wrapping around you gently. Each creak of the hull becomes softer, distant, till it sounds almost like a lullaby meadow in water humming in harmony. You can picture the surface above, a pale shimmer of ice and light, slowly closing over again, sealing you in peace. Let your body sink a little deeper into that borrowed warmth. Feel the slow melting of tension from your shoulders, down through your hands, through your heartbeat. Everything that was once sharp is now rounded. Everything once harsh is now calm, and as the story dissolves, so does the distance between you and sleep. The Arctic drifts away. The submarine fades into quiet. All that's left is warmth, steady, patient, and kind. Good night, traveler.